एक मिनट रुक जाओ, रेडी होने दो. चलो ये कर लेते हैं. This could be a great intro.
Hi, I'm Akshay.
Hi, this is Saurabh, and you are listening to the Founder Thesis podcast. We meet some of the most celebrated startup founders in the country.
And we want to learn how to build a unicorn.
In 2005, two seminal events happened. One was there was a movie called Swades launched at the end of 2004, which I watched, I think January or February 2005. Kind of rung a bell inside me because, the story was really about somebody who has already achieved everything in life outside of India and wants to come back home. To me, it sounded like, that's my story and I really should be going back now to contribute with my skill set in my own country rather than thinking of a job abroad. And this was a time when I was interviewing. So actually, after watching Swades, I did not do a few interviews because I thought, if I have to move back to India, I might as well focus on jobs there. Second thing was the Steve Jobs commencement speech, which I think also happened, I guess it was April or May 2005 as well.
Now I know that most of our travel plans took a hit because of, COVID-19. But there is no harm in planning your forthcoming trips and daydreaming about them because I know how much you hate your job. Just kidding. However, what I'm not joking about is you planning your forthcoming trips. And if there's one website that every millennial should be acquainted with, it's none other than Ixigo. The founder of Ixigo, Aloke Bajpai, has had a very colorful journey, starting with spending his childhood in Kenya, pursuing engineering from an IIT, and living the dream of working in a global tech company. He's done it all. But he couldn't stay away from his country or from following his passion, and he spent 11 years in making Ixigo, the leading platform for all Indian travelers. Listen to this candid conversation between Akshay and Alok about what it takes to build an online business in a frugal manner.
Hi, I'm Aloke Bajpai. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ixigo, India's leading AI-based travel app.
What was it like to grow up in Kenya? How was that experience like? And did it change your worldview, so to say, like from moving to... How old were you when you moved from India to Kenya?
I was 7, and I think that was a very for me, that was an age where it's an age of discovery and an age for learning new things. So I think I owe what I am today a lot to that experience. It was a multicultural place that we were living. Like Mombasa was a small island where multiple ethnicities from around the world, Europeans, Arabs, Africans, Indians, South Asians. So melting pot for a lot of cultures, religions. So got very good exposure there from that perspective. And also at that young age, a lot of things to discover in terms of natural, we did all the game reserves and a lot of natural beauty that exists in Africa. So it was one of the moments from childhood I fondly remember. A lot of beaches, a lot of wildlife, and a lot of friends from different nationalities. And the best part is, it was also my first tryst with computers. My dad actually, saw this poster so at the end of our street where we used to stay, there was this new computer institute, and this was 1988, right? When I was 8, this new computer institute had come up called Bits and Bytes, and they had procured a few Apple Macintoshes and they had started teaching some people how to use computers, right? And they had this summer program for kids. It was super expensive, but I think my dad didn't hesitate to, put me into that. My first tryst with computers, and it like love at first sight for me, and spent like 3 to 4 weeks learning how to use various tools on a Macintosh. I fell in love with the speech synth part back then, and also built a few games of my own, I recall. So that was an integral part of my entrepreneurial journey, falling in love with computers at such a young age.
What was Mombasa like as compared to India?
It's a very small island town, off the eastern coast of Kenya. So people don't know, but
But how is it so well off? I mean, for somebody to open an institute with Macs means it must be a well off place.
So I tell you, the background is that Mombasa was one of the places where Vasco da Gama landed before he came to India. It's a very historically significant port for East Africa. And, it's always been this trading post where, right from the British colonial rule till, Europeans coming there for the beaches, or whether it's Indian traders and settlers there. So Bank of Baroda, my dad used to work for, there are a lot of Gujaratis in Kenya, a lot of wealthy businessmen, traders, and they would all bank with Gujarati Bank, which course, Bank of Baroda, which became a nationalized bank. So that's how my dad ended up there. And the thing is, since it was this tourist hotspot, so obviously it was a little more affluent the rest of the country, and it had a lot of international folks. So international schools, very multicultural society, and I think
It was like a commercial hub.
yeah, tourist and commercial hub on the East Coast. Yeah.
In Mombasa. So did you do anything besides studying, like in terms of anything entrepreneurial that you recall?
Well, I mean, I was a kid, so I was discovering a lot of things, and one of the fond memories there is that I won this GK competition in my school. So they actually did this assessment across the whole school, and I came first in it. And why I recall that is that when I got the prize money, my dad asked me, "What do you want to do with this?" And I said, "I want to buy an encyclopedia." I mean, in hindsight, that was a pretty geeky thing to do for a 8-year-old. But I'd heard this cool thing called an encyclopedia, which everybody told me was big and fat, but it had all the world's knowledge in it. Back then, we didn't have Wikipedia, right? So you only had the encyclopedia. So went and bought this really fat. I still have it actually now. I was showing it to my kids just a few days ago. And I think some of that intellectual curiosity, I think came from that exposure I got there, and the kind of things you kind of start asking questions about around you that they really came about. And this computer course actually really set me started. Actually, when I came back to India, when we came back in 91, I asked my dad if we could buy a computer, and he said, the thing costs a few lakhs, right? I mean, this is 1991. There are not that many computers in the world still. So I couldn't get back to computers till probably 94, 93 maybe, when it got introduced as a subject in school, and every school started having these chilled out computer labs where you couldn't go inside with your chappals on. So that was, yeah. So I think that I think for me played the most critical role in my journey, that falling in love with computers at a young age and having that curiosity to build or try new things.
So after coming back, how many places did you switch? I assume your dad must be getting transferred every 2-3 years.
Actually, once he came back, he ended up being pretty stable in Kanpur and got transferred from one branch to another, of course, but then kind of settled down in Kanpur, which also was a place where all my relatives and all were. So grew up there, and my dad used to sometimes take over the weekend to the IIT Kanpur campus and show me that it's such a serene and cool place. Wouldn't you want to be here someday, right? That's how he kind of started building some
Oh wow!
inspiration.
How old were you when he?
Started doing that when I was probably 12, 13, and I didn't really know what happens there in that cool campus, but I really liked the serenity and the green, the green cover, and just the fact that there were lots of geeky looking people riding bicycles and with thick glasses on. By the way, I was somebody who wore glasses from the time I was 7, so I was myopic when I was born, probably covered when I was 6. So saw a lot of people like me wearing glasses, wearing chappals and roaming around. It looked like a cool place to be. So I think I was around 15 when I decided that I wanted to be an engineer.
Okay. So you got through in the first attempt itself.
Yeah, studied very hard actually. I mean, the last year, I mean the 12th standard year, I can't recall a single day where I watched TV for like more than 30 minutes, or I don't think I ever went to a movie hall that year. It was a lot of sacrifice and a lot of hard work and study. I mean, sometimes I look back and I say that, I don't think I've ever worked that hard. Even building a startup is not that hard, right? The amount of studying that you need to do. So, but I think I think what I learned from that is if you're passionate about something and you give it 100%, things do work out. Because I was really passionate about getting into a good college, and studied very. Actually, I studied so hard that I studied even for 12th standard with the same rigor. So I got into BITS Pilani and IIT Kanpur both at the same time, and then ended up at IIT Kanpur electrical engineering.
And this was all self-study, or you were going for classes or something?
We did have a few so-called, famous coaching classes in our town. I went to a couple of those, and I also forged a lot of friendships with people there, and many of those guys also made it to IIT Kanpur after that. So that's another interesting kind of. I think one of the learnings there was if you have like-minded people around you, that's the other important thing. So because people say you're the average of the 10 people or the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And I've seen that's true, right? So I was a very studious kind of child and geeky kind of person, and ended up spending a lot more time with similar people when I was in school. But when I went to IIT, the game changed because first semester itself, first quiz, they used to have these quizzes before the end semester exams, and the first quiz, I got a 0 in it, right? And I was like, what the hell, right?
How is that possible? Like,
Yeah, you come in, you've got a very good rank at IIT, and you're probably the best in your school, and you get this shock of your life, and then you're like, was a very, I mean, those days IIT Kanpur was one of the toughest kind of rigorous academic program, probably still is. But once you realize that everybody around you is equally bright or maybe brighter than you, you kind of start settling down. That's when I started moving a little bit away from just being purely academic oriented and started spending time on a few hobbies of mine. And one of those hobbies was computer science, by the way. So I ended up spending probably more time sitting in the computer center, just figuring things out on a first version Linux box, trying to compile the kernel and stuff like that, as opposed to my digital signal processing course books. So that love with computers kept playing out, even though I was studying electrical engineering. I was more in love with programming, ethical hacking, and figuring out how stuff works. Some of the ethical hacking was to the extent that we got banned from the computer center a few weeks, me and a few of my friends. But
so उस जमाने में ethical hacking करके तो कोई term नहीं था ना, वहाँ पे तो सिर्फ hacking
hacking ही
होता
होता था.
था.
Hacking ही होता था, absolutely. Even if you didn't cause harm, if you were found to have broken into a computer, you were in trouble.
So what's like your fondest memory of those 4 years?
Well, I made a lot of friends, right? And I think I learned a lot from those friendships. And also, like till the time you're in school or, you're at home, you do have a protective shell around you, and you're in your comfort zone. I think when you're on your own in college and, you discover all sorts of diverse types of people coming from various backgrounds, and IIT that way, like you had people coming from all stratas of society, all states of India, again, a very diverse lot to be with. And you couldn't decide who you would end up being wingmates with. So you had to live with that bunch, right? And form friendships with that bunch. So I think the learning was, how to get along with people and building your social and communication skills and forming bonds and friendships, which now last a lifetime. I mean, one of the best friends from IIT is now my co-founder, whom I've known, now for, let me check. So 23 years. So so I think some of those bonds of friendship and what you learn from those people and individuals is order of magnitude higher than what you end up learning in the classes.
I guess you also must have realized that competing only from academics would be tougher, and you decided probably to do better utilization of your time and get a more holistic personality grooming experience.
Oh yes. Oh yes, totally, totally. I think the first 2 semesters you try to compete, and then once you get the B's and C's, you start giving up, right? That's the typical kind of curve, right? So I think beyond the second year, I wasn't really caring about my grades, to be honest, and I even failed at one of the classes. And failure is also very important to teach you a few things. And I think I did buckle up and cover up and bounce back in the third year, and then by the fourth year, you're usually in a much more chilled out zone where you know exactly how much you need to study to get a passing grade or at least a C. So, I was one of those. I was not really like a 8 point or 9 point someone. I was actually a 7 point someone. Median in academics, but I would spend a lot of time on creative stuff. Like if there was a robotics competition or something, I would just find someone in my wing who wanted to participate with me and try to build out something. And whether or not we won it didn't matter actually. Most cases we actually did end up in the top 3, 4, but then it was more about participating and having fun. And then I remember I organized a lot of activities, and I was very participative in all the festivals and the tech fest that we used to have, Techriti, and a lot of the clubs, right? Debating, dumb charades, and whatnot. So I think the last 2 years I was actually spending only 30% of my time studying, so to say, and 70% of my time really discovering new and cool things. Like one of the cool things we did was me and a bunch of my wingmates actually pulled LAN cable from the nearest node down to our hostel and set up the first LAN in our hostel, right? And this I'm talking about like year 2000, right? And it was pretty cool. Like we went and bought a switch or can't remember, probably the hubs or switches, and did all the wiring ourselves. We had a bunch of folks who figured out how to do the IP routing and stuff, and bought a few computers. And that's the By the way, it took me that many years to convince my dad to buy a computer for me finally. So I was in my third year of college. Third year of college is when I bought a computer of my own. Until then, I was managing the computer center either in school or college. And so, but yeah, I mean, fondest memories include setting up some of those cool things on the IIT LAN. I mean, we set up the first server that was, I mean, it's illegit, but at that time you would download music from some of the torrents and, set up your own streaming server which could stream music to everybody in the hostel. And that was a cool thing to do, right? Back in like 20 years ago, right? so, so we were doing stuff like that, like a file swapping, file sharing network that worked across the hostels. We did that sort of stuff. I was known to be that sort of stuff. Like I think if you look at my yearbook, they'll say that if you have electrical engineering problems, don't go to Aloke. But if you have, practical computer issues, he's the guy to talk to, right?
So then what next? By the time placement season came around, what was happening?
So yeah, placement season, I actually didn't think too much about it nor plan enough about it. In those days, you just assume that since you're at IT, you'll get a job. So you don't need to worry too much about it. So it wasn't as well planned as what people imagine. Maybe these days they are, but we just sat in every company that came on campus. And the first company that came on campus was Hughes, Hughes Network Systems, which has these satellite network communication systems in the US, right? So they were hiring for their Bangalore operations, and we were one of the few people with the first jobs on campus, I recall. So we celebrated and all, and then I got a second offer from Amadeus, which was a travel technology company based in France. And just to make sure that we would all join, the people who got selected, they actually gave us a 7-day fully paid tour of the French Riviera and the campus of Amadeus, and that was enough to floor us and leave the Bangalore offer and go and join them instead. So that's how I ended up with Amadeus in France post college. So yeah.
So help us understand the business model of Amadeus, and I believe this kind of is pivotal in your own journey as an entrepreneur. So what exactly does Amadeus do? How do they earn revenue? And how have they evolved over the years?
So Amadeus is a global distribution system which was formed to essentially allow airlines to have more control on their distribution, right? So airlines use Amadeus for managing their inventory, hosting their inventory, and distributing it further downstream to agents and consumers, right? So think of it as very large mainframes that have the final seat allocation for every flight. So there are two large companies there, the Sabre and Amadeus. Actually, there's three, but then these two are the large ones that control most of the airline inventory in the world, right? And I was actually hired for something new and cool. So they were actually realizing that browsers were becoming the new thing, right? Because till then, all the travel reservation was done on green screen terminals, right? Which essentially you have these black screens where you type green commands. You must have seen some of these where they used to reserve tickets this way. Till even a few years back, they were being used.
Bloomberg terminals used to be in the past.
Yeah, so like they look similar. So these GDS terminals where you type long commands to check availability and pricing and reserve seats. So when I got hired, like this was 2001, the world was moving towards browsers, right? So there was obviously Internet Explorer and Firefox and a couple of other emerging browsers back then. And the idea was that, why shouldn't travel agents or distributors start taking advantage of these tools? And their thesis was that maybe for an airline ticket at that point, maybe it was not that critical to have a visual interface, but for, things like a cruise booking, which is very high margin, and where you cannot sell a cruise without showing something visually, right? I mean, unless there's photos and videos, nobody's going to be buying a cruise ticket, right? Because you can't even imagine what the product or service is. So I was actually part of a small team that wrote the world's first browser-based cruise booking software back in 2001, 2002, called Amadeus Cruise. This was for agents to sell to their customers. Like those days, even today, cruise is still sold a lot to walk-in customers, or people who actually want to talk to someone before they buy, right? And the agents would walk them through these, like we built this whole visual of the entire ship where you could zoom down, zoom out, zoom in into things, choose the exact cabin, get inside the cabin, see the photos. It was a pretty rich experience built in JavaScript back in 2001 too. It was fun to learn JavaScript, with a bunch of very smart engineers. And, that's something I'm still very proud of, like what we built back there. And I think post that, I got bored of GUI or like the UI, UX side of things and decided to move a little bit more towards the backend. So then, I switched roles after a couple of years to more of a systems and networks. They had this development data center in these for their entire global developer pool, and I started managing the systems and servers infra and understanding how the backend technology works from a from an operation standpoint. So did that for a year and then moved to INSEAD for my business school in 2004.
Why did you decide to do an MBA?
Both me and my co-founder, by the way, were at Amadeus, right? And, our biggest frustration there was that despite working very hard, right, we felt that, we were not utilizing all our potential. And, when we would look at the increment every year, like this was Europe, right? This was France, right? So like if you got a 1 or 2% increment, you were a lucky guy, right? So broadly, I think there was a sense of frustration building up on being a small cogwheel in a big system, right? Which happens in anyone working for a large company ends up feeling that way after a few years in where unless you kind of move up the ladder into meaningful roles, etc. I think the pace of work, and this was like probably the best place to live, like by far, right? French Riviera, you have Alps, and you have the sea on the other side, Mediterranean, and you have like 35-hour work week. If you overstay at work, you get asked by your boss every day, like, why did you stay back late yesterday? So it's that kind of a culture, right? And I still remember once, I asked my boss permission that can I actually work this weekend, and because I wanted to like finish something earlier than what I planned for. And he's like, are you crazy? Like, go and chill out. It's a weekend, right? And that's the kind of cultural difference between the way we work in India and the way we work in Europe. But when you're 24, 25 and you're ambitious, like that doesn't work, right? I mean, you probably want to do more, stretch yourself more, grow faster, learn more stuff. And it was slightly out of frustration and more out of, okay, I'm still young, I can still learn a lot, so why not figure out what an MBA really does for you? Because a lot of people, I mean, my family wanted me to at least do a master's before I think of doing anything in my life, right? So that was something they were also kind of saying it's a great idea. I felt that it was a good disconnect from my near perfect life, but then it would give me some discomfort post that to figure out what to do next. But then it was worth it to have that discomfort in your life. And last but not the least, I think I was looking to move out of France. I spent 4.5 years there, so I needed a break, like move somewhere else. And in INSEAD, I had an opportunity to choose a campus, so I chose the Singapore campus, which was pretty new back then. I really wanted to be back in Asia after my business school. That was something I was clear about. Like every day, I'd pick up the newspaper in Europe, and they would talk about the growth of India and China. It was like 2004, right? The next big thing is going to be China and India, right? So then you figure out that you have all the skills, and why would you not consider moving back to Asia if that's the opportunity? So went to Singapore campus of INSEAD, and my co-founder Rajneesh, who was also my flatmate back in France, right, stayed on with Amadeus for another year. It was only after I finished INSEAD that we started talking about the idea of setting up something together in India. So yeah, it was more frustration and wanting to utilize your full potential.
So once you finished INSEAD, did you opt for placements, or were you clear about doing your
No,
own
I
thing?
wasn't clear about anything. When I went to INSEAD, right, the coolest thing to do was to become a consultant or an iBanker, right? That was like the path for most of the people you spoke to. And like I was clear about iBanking. I didn't really want to, I mean, I didn't really see the kind of value that gets created in those kind of jobs. Consulting was something that sounded cool from the outside. And I sat through all the consulting, like the big 4 interviews, got rejected by most of them. I mean, I went till the final round in one of them, and the guy told me, you can't think straight. After getting that kind of feedback, I said, fine, no more consulting interviews for me. And I did get a couple of industry offers, but nothing in what I liked or really wanted to do. So I decided to move back to India. So I wrote to a few Indian companies, and one of them was a mid-sized travel technology company called Final Quadrant, which had just been featured on the cover page of one of the business magazines here. They were selling a travel technology ERP system to travel agencies across the world to help them go online. I figured out that it was an interesting opportunity because it was a VP business development partnerships kind of role, which is a skill I thought, I need to build over time because, as an engineer, you want to understand more of business and sales, before you decide to become an entrepreneur. So even though at the back of my mind, I was clear about moving back to India, I wasn't yet sure about jumping into entrepreneurship directly because I said I've never worked in India. I've never run a company before. I've never been at a very senior position in a company. Just been an engineer before my business school, so might as well work for someone and figure things out, right? And learn before you take the plunge. So I spent about 8-9 months working for them, but the urge to start something kept growing stronger and stronger in those 8-9 months, and I think it was around June 2000. Actually April, May 2006 that I decided to quit and started working on the idea of Ixigo around June 2006. So that I want to start up my own thing. And I'll go into why and how that happened as well. So in 2005, two seminal events happened. One was there was a movie called Swades launched at the end of 2004, which I watched, I think January or February 2005. And it kind of rang a bell inside me because, the story was really about somebody who has already achieved everything in life outside of India and wants to come back home. And to me, it sounded like, that's my story and I really should be going back now to contribute with my skill set in my own country rather than thinking of a job abroad. And this was a time when I was interviewing. So actually, after watching Swades, I actually did not do a few interviews because I thought, if I have to move back to India, I might as well focus on jobs there, right? And very few Indian companies actually come on campus at INSEAD. So I started applying directly to their website or through my network. And that's how I landed my job. So that happened. And the second thing was the Steve Jobs commencement speech, which I think also happened. I guess it was, April or May 2005 as well. And that speech also kind of, made me realize that the connecting the dots backwards, if I start doing that, the fact that I've worked in the travel industry, the fact that, I myself was an avid traveler, like when we were in Europe, we would travel almost every couple of months to some new country around. And, so that was one of the passion of my life and good with technology, understood computers decently well, loved the internet. And India was a market where the opportunity was, right? And the moment I started connecting all the dots, I was like, I need to be back in India and I need to start up something of my own. However, neither did I have the capital nor the business or sales know-how at that point because yes, I had a business school degree, but I didn't have any practical experience running any business or being a part of a leadership team in any business, right? So I decided to first do that job for as long as, I would require to learn those skill sets and then do my own thing, right? So, but that itch kept growing bigger and bigger over time, right? And, working for someone and working for your own thing, never the same, right? So worked there for about 8-9 months, cracked quite a few accounts in Europe, and then around, April, May 2006, decided to just one fine day went to my boss and said, I want to quit because I want to start doing something of my own. He was like, fine. Came out of the blue for him. And and then I just bought an rented out an apartment here in Gurgaon, and that time Gurgaon was a few buildings along the highway, and then huge piles of dirt beyond that, right? So the apartments were dirt cheap, right? And that's why not Delhi but Gurgaon, and it was nothing similar to what Gurgaon is today. So called up Rajneesh, called up another friend of mine at Amadeus whom I'd worked with in the Amadeus Cruise project, German guy, and convinced them to join me down here. So actually we had Rajneesh and Jens and me, started figuring out what are we building for India. And over time, that idea became Ixigo, right? So that's how we started.
So, what was the thesis that you started with, that you knew you want to do something in the travel space? What was the travel market like at that time? And did you see that there is a gap in the market? What did you think you would do?
So actually, when we started, the initial idea was to build a travel technology company that could be a SaaS business for airlines and OTAs, and give them technology to run their, commerce and operations, right? So because when we were at the GDS side of things, at Amadeus, we realized that the suppliers themselves were not very well equipped on technology, right? And so, maybe powering them with technology could be cool, right? So that's why we called the company, when we started, we called it Travenues. It was travel plus avenues. And the idea was more B2B than B2C when we initially started working on it. And we even had a customer, we did some work for a company called Ixigo, which was building an activities and tours marketplace, right? And we were prospecting, few airlines and few other international travel companies. But then it struck us that the B2C opportunity in India was also, up. So the MMT guys had just come back to focus on India. Like initially they were a US to India focused business, but they had now come to return to focus on India. There was Yatra, Travel Guru, Clear Trip, etc. would just raise their first round of funding, to build a OTA for a B2C here. And there were, of course, Air Deccan and, in those days, Sahara and a couple of other airlines were competing and starting to stimulate the market with very low airfare, right? So it started to look like that the OTA market would happen, right? Even though it was very early days, there were not even 50 million internet users, probably 30 or 35 million back in 2007. So the market was very, very small in everybody's eyes, but the size of the prize was still large enough for people to start looking at backing, right? But when we looked at the B2C space, we were clear that the model we really liked back then was the Metasearch model, where you worked with all the inventory providers and you helped the consumer sift and mine through all those deals and fares and allowed them to find where the best deals are and book it there, right? It's a bit like what other companies in the West had started to do, but even those companies were just a couple of years old. So for India, that market was definitely ahead of its, like the idea was ahead of the time. And when we actually went to a lot of airlines with the Metasearch idea, they rejected it on day one because they sort of said, abhi to OTA market hi build out ho raha hai, why would you do a Metasearch, right? But we didn't want to actually do what everybody, one of the things DNA wise always has existed that we don't like doing things the way others do. And the reason is because most of the time the run of the mill solution is not what the consumers want, right? So our thesis was that people, and it was all desktop back then. So we said people don't want to open 5 browser windows and do the same search on the airline side and 4 OTAs and then compare the pricing. They want to do all that at one place, right? So that was the idea with which we started Ixigo. And we started building connects to the airlines and the OTAs, or in some cases, pulling those fares from their websites and allowing consumers to compare and get redirected back to book wherever they found those fares compelling enough, right? And just on the sheer UX and simplicity that we came up with. So when we launched in June 2007, right, we were overwhelmed by the kind of response we got within the first few weeks, just because, we had a much more faster, smoother and time and money saving experience for everyone. So it just grew like wildfire by word of mouth, right, in the next few months.
You decided to shut down whatever B2B initiatives you had by that time. Like you were pretty clear that you want to do B2B.
Yeah, so we were very clear by the end of, absolutely. So I think we were very clear by end of 06 that that's not what we want to do because we saw that the sales cycle were very long. There were multiple issues. The sales cycle at airlines and even large travel companies were sometimes up to a year. And secondly, B2C started looking like a once in a lifetime opportunity, right? Saying that, if we don't get into this, we will miss the whole bus, consumers coming online and searching and buying travel online, right? So it was end of 2006 we decided that B2C is what it is. It took us 6 months to build Ixigo and launch it. So June 2007, 3rd of June, I still remember the date we actually took it live. And the site almost crashed that evening because a lot of people sent it out to all their mail groups and Yahoo chat groups and all those things that existed back then. There were people working in companies like Microsoft and Google who mailed their entire teams about it, and then we started to see a lot of hits coming from those IPs, and it was interesting how in those days word of mouth used to work.
How was this product superior to, say, a Make My Trip, Clear Trip kind of a product? Because they have something similar where they aggregate fares across multiple airlines, but they also handle the payment and reservation part.
Yeah, so Akshay, when we launched, we used to search all these sites as well as the airline sites and return those results to you faster than their own website could, right? And there was some secret sauce there. We used something called Ajax back then, which was very, very cutting edge. Like none of the OTAs really used it. It allowed us to bring down the speed of response to seconds because many of them used to take a minute. And then we built a really slick user interface with first of its kind features. Like we had a fare graph for fare calendar, fare graphs, etc. for the next 90 days. We started doing mobile friendly features because in those days there was WAP. There was no mobile internet per se, but there was something called WAP, and we were the first WAP compliant travel company as well. We even did a SMS gateway for travel search within a month of launch with basically a number you could message to and get fares and information back. So I think our approach was to be the best at UX and be able to find the best deals wherever they are, because when you're not owning inventory, you can build a much more efficient model by where you don't need to spend a lot to attract your consumers, and you don't need to build a large operations out to service those customers, right? So it was kind of a growth hack for us to get into the market fast, and that growth hack over the years, got us to 1 million plus monthly users. And that's the only point when we decided that we need to go down a little bit more towards the transactional side of the funnel.
How did you fund it in this first year while you were working on the launch? Like 7 you launched. So from 6 to 7, how did you fund the business?
Actually, I did have a little bit of savings, even though I still had a MBA loan I hadn't paid off. But I had a few lakhs of savings, and Rajneesh and the other, initial teammates also brought in a few lakhs of capital. But I was very little. I mean, in hindsight, that like in today's terms, it'll sound very small. It was not even 20 lakhs, right? And that helped us with the initial capital to buy a few computers and get started, right? And pay our rent for a year or whatever. But yeah, I think we were very naive on this topic. If I look in retrospective, I don't think we were caring or worrying a lot about, hey, will there be funding? When will it come? Because we kind of assumed that if we build something good, it will come. And the reality was different because we approached a lot of investors, even before launch to show what we were doing, and then even post launch. And we didn't get a lot of interest because people thought that the OTA space, like they didn't understand how we were different at that point and how much operating leverage we had versus the OTAs. And secondly, I think the market and space itself was so new that for a lot of investors, writing a check in a market where 4 OTAs have already raised money and the market itself, nobody knows how big that is, that was not cool.
When did you do your first fundraise?
Actually, initial capital that we raised was from family and friends. So a few of my relatives, a few of my friends, they put in some money end of 2006 to support us because we kept running out of money every 3 months, right? I mean, I think the first 6-7 months we survived on our own money. Then we realized that, the costs really ratchet up, once you take up server space. Like by the time we had launched, we realized that we would need more money because you would then have more traffic coming in and you would need to take professional server hosting and things like that. So that's the time when we brought in a couple of angel investors who were largely my friends from my business school, and I kept talking to all the major investors in India. There were not that many, probably 8 institutional investors in India, and most of them had already either said no or said, let's talk in 6 months or things like that. But it was in early 2008 when we got a call from a Singapore-based investor who had looked at our website and found it pretty cool and nifty. And he was a Norwegian guy called William Klipgen, who later on became our first seed investor. So he ran a fund in Singapore that committed $500,000 to us in February 2008. And that I still recall what happened there. So, this was January, we were running out of money. I mean, to the extent that the office needed by that time we'd taken a very small office, Gurgaon, like a 6-seater office, right? Literally like a 200 square feet space, nothing very fancy. And, the day I actually wrote a check to buy a printer because we needed a printer in office. Now, some need was there. Their offer letter print करने की तो जरूरत पड़ती है, employment agreement, So we had one girl who was our HR admin and everything rolled into one, and she was like, we need a printer, So I was like, okay, it costs $10,000. Let me go and buy it. So I went out and I actually wrote a check to buy it, right? And the check actually bounced. So the next day, the guy was at our office door saying, sir, check to bounce hogi, in front of all, like we had 2 or 3 employees by then. So, and I was like, oh shit, so we don't even have 10,000 in our account today. And this was around the same time where I got this call from William, because otherwise I would have had to claw more money from my friends and family and figure out how to survive for a few more months. And William says, you need to fly down to Singapore and present to my, my co-investors, my partners essentially. And there was a big discussion for me and Rajneesh because we were like, yeah, 10,000 पैसे तो है नहीं. Like we'll have to eventually pay it out of our own pocket. Like we're down to literally the last bit. And are we going to punt it on a flight ticket to Singapore or what, right? And we were like, here there is no downside in it. Worst case we lose $20,000, right? But let's just try this. So I actually took that flight out and presented to William and his partners. And the unbelievable part was that I did this 1 hour long, 1.5 hour long presentation. They said you can wait downstairs in the hotel lobby, and we'll see you in a bit. And in an hour, William walks down with a term sheet, which is their standard term sheet, and he's like, this is what our standard term sheet is. Let us know if you're okay with the terms because we'll send this to you by tomorrow. And I didn't even read it actually. I said, looks okay. I was like, and I mean, it was actually a standard term sheet. But I flew back to India, and we couldn't believe that we just raised $500,000 right in one meeting. But that's how our seed round happened, right? One thing I realized, I mean, now that I'm an angel investor on the other side, one thing I realize is that, when you're writing a very early stage check, I think a lot just boils down to, the person that you're trusting and the product that you're seeing live, right? I mean, you can't really do a lot of homework beyond that. And I think for William also, when we talked to him, like, how did you make that initial bet on us? He was like, I really like your team and your approach towards building something, new with a different approach, right, in the market, which was already competitive. And we were very frugal. So he actually, as a part of the diligence post term sheet, he did come down and visit our office. And we were a bit, let's say afraid or scared or whatever, saying कि यार मैं छोटे से office में आएगा यहाँ पे. Literally we sit so close to each other that if I move my elbow I'll touch the next chair. What will he think, right? And we don't even have a meeting room. So he said, I want to do a 2 hour long meeting with you. So I said CCD में बैठ जाएंगे. Downstairs there was a CCD from there, and when we sat in CCD, he said, what guys, I'm really impressed by how you're operating up there, because frugality is what I really look for, in early stage companies. And that is so rare, right, in an investor or even here, because I think a lot of people out there fall for flashy stuff, right? But we've kind of been that way. Even today, we might have more meaningful resources and grown bigger and all that. But I think there is a frugal mindset we still operate with, and that is something we've learned from those hard initial days where we were bootstrapping, and then $500,000 not a lot of money. So even after that money came in, we realized that we wanted to scale fast. We would have to hire a bigger team, move into a bigger office, start doing marketing. So costs started inflating very, very quickly, right? And the only good news was the moment you announce a fundraise like that, all your Series A guys are suddenly calling you up, right? The same folks who already said no a few months back. So we started getting a lot of inbound from institutional investors. One of them even wrote us a term sheet, but that term sheet unfortunately did not close due to Lehman Brothers crisis in September '08. Yeah. So we, within like 6 months of raising money, we were in a situation where we had a broken term sheet, and with just 3 to 4 months of burn sitting in the bank, based on our current burn rate at that point, right? Even though our traffic had snowballed significantly, we were already doing like 250,000 unique users a month or something in that range by the end of 2008. But revenue wise, like it was just a few lakhs of revenue a month, not even enough to pay salaries, forget about anything else, right? So it was really still burning a lot of money every month. So we were left in a crisis situation essentially within that high point that I described of raising money. Within 7 months of that, back to a very low point where you figure out that you're going to lose everything if you don't act. And that was a turning point for our journey.
What was the way you were monetizing the product till then? Like, how did you make money when people would search and go out of your website?
If you clicked out from Ixigo and you bought a ticket on one of the partner sites of ours, we used to make money, either on a CPC or a CPA basis, right? And then we had ads. So we had banner ads or text ads on our platform that we monetized from. So it was these two primary modes of monetization. And by then we had started expanding into we started building hotels and buses. It was very early days, but started partnering with companies like Redbus and others in the space, and we'd also started train information, and back then IRCTC API wasn't really available for everyone. So we started doing information-led content for trains, right? Because there were a lot of queries starting to come in for schedules, routes, availability, timings. So we started building a lot of pages for that sort of content. And mostly the marketing we were doing was search engine optimization, trying to rank well on Google for those queries. I think Facebook was very new, but we started leveraging it as a platform for social reach. Very early company to start doing that back then. I mean, we had a 1 or 2 member content marketing team that started posting quizzes and content, etc. on Facebook back in 2008-9. I'm talking about, so. But we realized that we couldn't fight the same battle that the OTAs were fighting on TV and print, burning millions of dollars every year and raising subsequent rounds of funding year after year. So in total, in the 5 years that post, our seed round, most of the OTAs in India would have cumulatively burned through 300 to 400 million dollars, right? Just largely on marketing spend, right? And it was a very bloody battle being fought out there. But in our minds, one thing we were certain of was that this is a long haul race. There is no urgency to kind of, go for hyper growth by burning a lot of money, given that the market itself was very severely underpenetrated, right? We were talking about maybe now 50-60 million internet consumers, right? Not more than that. So it was still a very, very small part of the overall market that was online. So we said, even if we kind of start fighting that battle late, I don't think we lose much. It's just a question of surviving till then.
So you said that you would make money from partner sites, but would you also list like non-partner sites, like when someone would search for airfare from A to B?
We had a few of those listings, but those were very small airlines, which helped us to build content for those routes, as opposed to, especially for international. Like international, obviously we were not partnered with everybody that we showed. Like we were partnered only with the top 5-6 carriers, folks like Emirates or Lufthansa, etc. Because you didn't have the bandwidth to go and partner with everybody, and B, you didn't care because the long tail would not be more than 20-30% of your booking, right? So you always start with the top carriers that you're able to monetize from, and that's what we did, right?
Was it a tough sell? Like you previously found out that the B2B cycle is a long cycle and difficult to do. So when you started going, because initially it would have been free traffic for them, right? You had a Metasearch engine where...
Yes. So what happened? Yeah. So when we launched, it was all free traffic for everyone. But we went to airlines and said, look, here are the UTM codes you need to track in your Google Analytics or whatever you use, and tell us how many bookings this is driving for you. If you think that we're growing your bookings week on week, then let's partner and we can show you even faster growth, right? Jet Airways and Indigo were the first 2 airlines back then to sign up with us, and I think they were both very progressive in their thinking when it came to digital marketing and understanding of this space, and they knew how meta searches outside India, such as Kayak or Skyscanner, were benefiting airlines in their region. So they could see the value of a meta search player emerging in India, right? Because it also creates a balance of power in their mind, for the ecosystem. So I think as we showed our staying power and growth, airlines started to believe that this is something that could definitely grow over time and be useful to partner with. And I think sometimes you just have to be persistent. So even with the other airlines, even though they didn't sign up within a couple of months of launch, I was so persistent. Like I remember that there were at least 3 times when I went to the Kingfisher Airlines office. It used to be in Fort in old Mumbai, and I would just sit in the reception waiting for a meeting with the right guy for up to 2 to 3 hours, right? Because the guy was busy in several meetings and he would keep pushing that meeting around because he wasn't really sure on. Like I was a nobody back then, Ixigo was a no one, and I think just having that persistence of going and sitting there for 3 hours, and I remember those days were fun because I used to take this local down till Churchgate and walk down to the office in Fort and sometimes come back without a meeting at all, but not get dejected and show up again the next day, right? So you have to be persistent. And that was the lesson I also learned when I was in my fundraise, that, we got so many no's that at one point you feel dejected, right? At one point there was this female venture capitalist who told me that, what, Alok, you're wasting your time. You won't even be able to raise $100,000 with an idea like this, right? And I remember I cried that day when I went back to my, and this was in Bangalore, I went back to my hotel room and cried, right? because like no entrepreneur wants to hear that about what they're so passionate about, right? And all I said was that, the only thing I can do is work hard and prove her wrong, right? I mean, there's nothing more I can control. So that's the way you have to approach the situation every time you get a rejection. So it was the same with the airlines. I think it took 6 more months to bring on everybody else after Jet and Indigo, but we did bring all the airlines into paying partners. By 2010-11, it was obvious that Ixigo was becoming a force to reckon with because we were the only travel company growing without any marketing spend. I mean, literally, our marketing spend on Google in 2009-10 was $0, right? Like we were not spending any money on SEM, which is the same for the last 4.5 months. I'm proud to say, last 4.5 months we spent zero on Google, right? So whenever you're in that situation and you can still grow, I think it does inspire a lot of confidence. And then 2011, seeing our numbers, a lot of the investors started coming back and talking to us, and Make My Trip obviously also approached us to make an investment, and then they were safe, and that deal came together in 2011. Safe and MMT invested in our business in the Series A round, and we that was the first time we had serious institutional money. So you can say that from 2006 to 2011, 5 years we survived on less than $1 million. I think we did a small bridge round in 2000, early 2010, early 2009 when
with the same
with the
Norwegian
same
guy.
guy. So they gave us a very fair deal. They said, we will give you a valuation that reflects your growth since we invested. However, you need to bring in, X dollar from the outside, and we will match it with X dollar as investors ourselves, whatever amount you are able to bring in. And we went back to all our friends, family, my INSEAD network, two of my professors, the dean of INSEAD in Singapore, and one of my entrepreneurship professors, Patrick Turner. He was so much in love with the idea. Like I had one phone call with him, and he wired the money the next day. He didn't even wait for a term sheet to be signed, right? So and the dean, and he brought in the dean of INSEAD with him because they could see that the company was doing well. I mean, all the numbers were tracking up. Running out of money is a situation, but performance of the company has nothing to do with that, right? So the performance of the company is good and you're running out of money and your metrics are decent and your unit economics are great, there are always people who will support you, right? So we saw that. And so we brought in the 250K from the outside. Our seed investors matched with the 250K, and they were extremely supportive. Like from the word go, when they saw the crisis coming, they said, "Don't worry, keep executing, cut down costs, but you have our support, right?" And so we did another 500K sort of interim bridge round. Maybe it was just under 500K. So in total, for 5 years, we had almost bootstrapped because as founders, I don't think our salary was anything more than 20-30,000 a month for those 5 years of our life, right?
Were you married by then?
I got married in 2009, end of 2009, November 2009. And after much of these things was sorted, and I think one of the things I realized by that time was that some of these things are not in your control. So as an entrepreneur, one of the mistakes one makes is that you always feel that you're in control and you're the boss and you're running things and you can do whatever you want. But when a crisis hits, you realize that a lot of things are not in your control. And for me, it was that pivotal moment where I said, if I'm not thinking about what I'm doing in my personal life at this point, because that's one thing you can still, focus back on, because for 3 years, I'd not thought a single minute about it. So 2009, I decided to get married and settle down to some aspect, but the company was on fire in terms of growth, right? So one of the interesting things is 2009 and 10 were amazing years for us. Like we grew at more than 100% year on year on every metric. And we're talking about like economic downturn, right? Year. So when this whole crisis came, the way we approached it was pretty unique, right? So we were 24 or 25 people at that point as a team, and we could see that we wouldn't last more than tops 4 months, with the kind of money we had left. So we needed to act, right? And the knee-jerk reaction when we spoke to people was that, you should just let half your team go and increase your runway to like 7-8 months, 9 months, and 9 months may hopefully things will start getting better and you will bounce back. However, we had so painstakingly built this team, and one of the biggest learnings for me in the last 14 years is that, it's all about the people and the team you build, right? I mean, without them, you cannot achieve anything. And if you hire the right people, they can really take you into another orbit. And so these were all handpicked people, painstakingly brought in by us. Now, we couldn't even imagine or think about how we could let these people go, right? And that too during a time when finding a job would be difficult as well. So when we had that discussion, we said, let's be transparent with the team. And Rajneesh and I went to the whiteboard and actually told them what our P&L was looking like transparently, right? We said, look, this is how much we are earning every month. These are the three main heads of our cost, right? And this is how much runway we have. Now, if we need to extend this runway to a year, this is what we need to do. So, we said that the most likely outcome is that we may have to let some people go, but then if there's any other outcome, we can all work out on, I'd love to hear your views. And this young engineer called Ayush stands up and says that, why can't we all just work without salary for a few months, right? If that helps, because, he said, I just did the math in my head, but 3 months without salary, which means, you get a lot of runway as a result. And I was like, that sounds cool, but then, most people have their own rent and EMI and multiple things going on, right? So it's not practical. But the buzz started in the room, like people were talking to each other suddenly, and they're like, what if we all go down to like half of our salaries or something like that? It automatically extends the runway by that much. And that was a pivotal moment because we realized that the team has just found a solution that we didn't think of. And since they've come up with the solution, there's immense buy-in for it. And we said, fine, let's do that. So as founders, we went to zero and the team went to half their salary. And that continued for almost 9 months. We were able to revert salaries only 9 months later. Let me tell you, not a single person of that team, and maybe one or two of them left on their own accord because marketing is something we're not doing. But then all the core people, product tech, business, none of them left us for at least 2 years post that movement. In fact, some of them stayed for another 4 or 5 years, right? And most of them saw us through till the time we were breaking even. I mean, so in end of 2010, we were almost breaking even. Like 2011, we were on the verge of profitability. So I think it was a massive turnaround. We managed to execute with people who were committed, and we gave ESOPs to all of them. Some of those people monetized their ESOPs when our Series A happened and ended up with a few crores, which we're very proud of. And then some of them went on and started their own companies, because I think riding this up and down curve is very important in every startup's journey, because it does teach you a lot about who you are and what you're capable of doing.
Okay. So what would you say is the secret sauce of Ixigo? And, if I were to make a guess, I would probably say it's two things. One is that you've used technology and done very clever ways to outshine your competitors through technology, like the example of Tara, which you gave just now. And I think the other is that your approach to marketing has been very unconventional, where you have, for example, I would say that building the train app is like a marketing first decision, that it helped you acquire a lot of consumers, or similarly you have a viral video factory in house. So what do you think about that?
I think if I sum it up, we've been very blue ocean in our thinking, right? When I went to INSEAD, I learned about blue ocean strategy, but broadly, blue ocean is that you're not deriving what you do from any playbook, right? Whether it is the kind of people we hire, the culture we built, the kind of the way we have reacted to adversity, the way we do marketing, the kind of product we've built, our approach to business models, and how agile we've been in changing them with the time, or how we think about new products, right? We don't compare ourselves with others, and as a result, it is hard to find comparables with us. And I think that's the way you build a unique product and brand, right? Because if we get too biased by what's already out there, and if we get, in fact, internally people say, hey, why are we not looking at what that company is doing? And I'm like, we should never look at competition. We should only spend more time with customers, right? Because if we know what the customers want, we would have built that even before the competition. And even if they have built it and the customers don't want that, they'll discover it within a year, right? So there's no point looking at what competition is doing. There is more value in staying at the bleeding edge of listening to your customers. to the extent that even today, me, my co-founder, my leadership team reads a lot of feedback personally, responds to at least 1 to 2% of the feedback ourselves, attends to a few customer calls or queries, every month ourselves. During the COVID times, the entire team was on customer support, including marketing and engineers and product guys. Because if you're not close to your customer, you will not understand their pain. And only by being close to them, you will come up with blue ocean thinking, which is not boxed by some dogma and what already exists out there and what an what the definition of an OTA or a meta needs to be. Because at times, when I speak to investors, they're like, what are you? Are you a meta or a OTA or are you a hybrid? And I'm like, I'm Ixigo, right? I don't like being boxed into, I want to build the most consumer centric company in this space. And I want to build it with a lot of empathy for my customers, because I believe most OTAs out there do not have that much empathy for their customers. Unlike in e-commerce where you have some brands that have built on the basis of customer empathy and customer experience, in the OTA space, you cannot think of one brand that can offer you great customer experience. And we think that is an opportunity, right? And that is why we decided to pivot fully to an OTA model, the last year or so. But we are the youngest OTA in the space, right? We spent 10 years being a meta and maybe 1 year being an OTA at this point, right? And I think time will tell how we can, improve our customer experience to become the best in the space.
Do you foresee needing to raise funds again, or since you've already hit profitability in the last quarter of previous financial year, then?
I mean, we'd see at this point, obviously, travel is the worst hit category, right? And I think from a fundraise perspective, it's not the right time, because we would rather, wait it out, survive the crisis and come out shining on the other side before we speak to anyone. And obviously, our current assessment is that we should be able to turn profitable sooner than people with higher fixed costs in this space. So, we think that within the next 6 to 12 months, we should be back to profitability with even some growth in the category. And if we are able to get back to profitability soon, we may not need any further capital. If not, we may have to talk to investors sometime next year once things are bouncing back.
So what do you see as the end goal? Do you want to take it public, take Ixigo public, or do you see a larger company acquiring Ixigo, or what do you see as the long game?
I think after we turn profitable this year, we are increasingly confident that we can take this company public. We are one of the hardly any profitable OTA in this category, so we are one of the only profitable ones. If we are able to build scale next, so profitability plus scale is where it becomes interesting to IPO. I think given COVID, it's going to take a setback for a year before we can plan that out. But it looks like within 3 to 4 years, an IPO is foreseeable.
So what is it that you personally have as a goal for yourself? Is there some answer that you're seeking to, something you want to learn? What's driving you personally?
Look, when I started this, what was driving me personally was, wanting to come back to India and do something meaningful, right? With my skill, talent, and passion, or as the Japanese say, the Ikigai, right? Where your what you want to do and what you love doing, and what can pay you, etc., all come together. I think I'm enjoying this journey. It's been very long journey. It's been almost 14 years, like I said, but it doesn't feel that long. When I look, every day has been exciting. There's always a lot of ups and downs, but that's what it makes it more enjoyable. I think the meaning I'm seeking is, can we end up building a brand and a legacy that lasts the test of time, right? And that is something where still a lot of work may be required. We might only be 1% done in terms of, how large an impact Ixigo can create for travel in India. And, that's what I would want to do before I think that I'm done.
Interesting, right? We sure as hell must thank Aloke for creating a website that has made the process of booking flights, hotels, and accommodations easy, simple, and highly efficient. For all of those who are planning a trip around the country, head to www.ixigo.com and suit yourself to some exciting offers and deals.
If you like the Founder Thesis podcast, then do check out our other shows on subjects like marketing, technology, career advice, books, and drama. Visit thepodium.in, that is thepodium.in, for a complete list of all our shows.